Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime and psychological cases, as well as a little bit of fashion and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. Now today I'm back with, I have some coffee because today's case is quite a long one and it's quite a complex one. I have been researching this one for a little while now and it took me a long time just to work through the information. Sometimes it just happens with cases. It doesn't mean they're necessarily the most complex one out there, but sometimes it's just a little bit too much, either just too much data, like too much information to work through, or there's a lot of like legal jargon and things like that that I have to kind of try and understand myself. So before we get started discussing this case, I just want to run through my usual disclaimer, just letting you guys know that I'm not claiming to be an expert in this case or any of the other cases over on my channel. I am simply relaying information I'm able to find myself using sources on the internet. And so since only certain sources are actually accessible to me, it means that I may get things wrong, mispronounce things or leave things out, and I apologise if I do any of those things. I'm not trying to do anyone any harm or an injustice. I'm simply working with the information that I have available to me. And so with all that being said, we should just go ahead with today's case. And today we're going to be discussing the case of Cathy Ford's disappearance. Catherine Denise Ford was born on the 20th of July in the year of 1968 in a place called Gorman in Maryland. Gorman was only a small town, and because of this, Cathy's case really hit the local residents hard. When it all happened, a lot of people got involved and a lot of people knew her personally because of how small and friendly it was. In the year of 1988, Cathy was a 19-year-old girl living her life in her hometown. She had graduated from high school successfully and she even had herself a serious long-term boyfriend. She spent most of her time working in a local diner called the Old Mill Restaurant that was actually owned by her parents. She was all round considered to be a lovely, reliable, well-behaved young woman. According to everyone who knew Cathy, she really wasn't the type of person at all to get herself into trouble in any sense, and so this makes the details of her case extremely unsettling. This case begins on the 17th of February in the year of 1988 at around 1 p.m. Cathy was working as she typically did in her parents' diner. That afternoon, the diner's phone had rang, to which Cathy had answered, and there was a man on the other end of the phone call who had introduced himself as a local magistrate. This person had told Cathy that he had received word from the local sheriff's department that they would be enforcing stricter rules on local smaller businesses who had gotten themselves into the habit of supplying alcohol to underage people, and it was his job to kind of ring round and inform all of the businesses of these changes. After the end of this phone call, another phone call was received at the diner, to which Cathy once again answered. This time it was a different man on the other end of the phone call, and he had introduced himself to be a police officer working undercover. He told Cathy that he was able to give her confirmation that he knew of some random spot checks that would be occurring on the local businesses in relation to them possibly selling alcohol to minors, and he'd asked Cathy if she could meet up with him later that afternoon at around 3 p.m. if she could go through with him and some colleagues some of the questions that they had referring to the matter. To the knowledge of her co-workers, this is what she had agreed to, as before long she was collecting her belongings and heading out the door. But before she left, she made sure to tell each of her co-workers to make sure that if anyone had asked for alcohol inside the diner, they were to check their ID no matter what. And then around an hour later, Cathy returned back to the diner to collect her bag that she had left there when she'd left last time, but this time she had a significant change in appearance. She was in a completely new outfit, she changed her hair, she'd done her makeup, so much so that all of her co-workers had noticed how nice and dressed up she looked. Before heading out again, Cathy had asked one of her co-workers if she looked alright, and the pair had a brief kind of polite conversation. But when one of her co-workers had asked her about the unusual phone calls that she'd received earlier, she'd brushed them off completely without sharing any more information with them. And then she was off out the diner. She headed straight for her father's car that she was driving, which was a silver-coloured Bronco car, and began driving down Route 50. The last Cathy was seen was driving down the road and turning onto a place called Bismarck Road in an area not far outside of Gormania, I believe is how you pronounce it. But this was the last time that Cathy Ford was seen. Now, as it turns out, not everything about Cathy's life was known by her parents, her boyfriend, her friend, her co-workers, as she had actually been seeing a different man outside of any of them knowing. This man's name was Paul Ferrell, and he too had been in a serious relationship at the time that the two met and began their own relationship together. The pair had met in the later months of the previous year, 1987, and they'd begun their secret relationship from there without either of their partners knowing. So a little bit of background into Paul Ferrell. He lived in a town just across the Potomac River from Gorman called Gormania, as this was where his parents owned a small shop. A few years prior, he decided to join the military, but after just a few years of serving, he decided to head back to his hometown to help his parents run their store. In his spare time, he enjoyed boxing, he became somewhat of an amateur boxer, and then in January of the year of 1988, he was employed as a deputy sheriff in Grant County. And not long after returning to his hometown, he began a serious relationship with a local woman named Cathy Bernard. She was a single mother of two, and the pair, to all external people, so everyone who seemed to know them and know their relationship, they just seemed as though they were planning on settling down and starting a family lifestyle together. And not long after he was sworn in as a deputy, he decided he would rent himself a trailer off of Bismarck Road in Gormania. And then this takes us to the date of Cathy Ford's disappearance. On February the 17th, 1988, he'd been having what he described as a typical day's routine, where he, I believe, was helping out in the store with his parents up until around 8:30 p.m. when he decided to head to the local bowling alley to meet up with some friends. When he arrived at the bowling alley, one of the workers there had told him that a bunch of phone calls had been placed to him at the bowling alley saying that someone was asking for him over and over again, and they'd left a number. So he went to the phone, decided to ring the number up to return the call, and it would turn out that it was Cathy on the other end. Cathy did answer the phone, and as it turns out, this was around 7 hours after the last known sighting of her. He claimed that when she'd answered his phone call, he immediately got the sense that she sounded like she was crying and she was extremely upset. He claims that Cathy had told him that she really desperately needed to meet up with him and see him, and so the pair agreed that they would meet up in a little while at the high school car park. She wouldn't tell him what was wrong, but she did seem at first quite adamant that she wanted to meet him at his trailer in Gormania, but they both settled on meeting at the high school. Paul later told investigators that he had gone to the high school car park as they'd agreed, and he'd waited there for almost half an hour but saw no sign of Cathy whatsoever. And what he didn't know at this point was that Cathy's parents were already extremely concerned for her safety, and they had been for a number of hours, and the police had already been informed of her missing person status. The following day, a huge search took place in the town, with many of Cathy's friends and family actively out searching for her. Paul Ferrell turned up at Cathy's parents' diner the following morning, kind of unaware of the search for Cathy. He hadn't known that she'd gone missing, and happened to bump into Cathy's boyfriend, a man named Darvin Moon. And this is when he had learned of Cathy's disappearance, and that the last sighting of her had been the night before, driving towards Bismarck Road, which also happened to be the road in which Ferrell owned a trailer. There had apparently, according to Cathy's boyfriend, been a sighting of a large amount of smoke coming out from around the area of Bismarck Road somewhere throughout that same night, in which many residents had allegedly seen, but kind of assumed it had been down to something a little bit more normal and explainable. When you see smoke, you don't necessarily think of the worst case scenario. Many people were aware of Ferrell and where his trailer was parked, since, like I said, it was a very small, close-knit town. And so when he had been told of this sighting of the smoke, Ferrell claimed that he felt like many people were almost accusing him in some way, not explicitly, but he felt as though people were almost hinting that they believed he had something to do with it. And so he decided to take it upon himself to go and search the wooded area around his trailer in search of something relating to this sighting of smoke. It was here, really not far from his own trailer at all, that he came across Cathy's car, but it was in extremely bad condition, and it looked as though it had been set on fire for a number of hours. According to Ferrell, his initial panic had been that when he'd spotted the car and realised it was Cathy's, if he had decided to go ahead and search the car a little bit closer, he was kind of scared that he would come across Cathy's body, and so he opted against investigating it any further. However, he made the very unpopular decision to not tell anyone of his discovery, likely due to the feeling as though, because of where it was found, and like he said, he was already feeling as though people were accusing him of something, it would likely lead people to think that he had some sort of involvement in the car getting there, which he didn't want them to think. Instead, he decided to send a letter marked as anonymous to Cathy's parents at the diner, pretending to be someone with the knowledge that Cathy was alive and well, and that she had decided to run away, but she wanted her parents to know that she was still safe. And in inside the letter he'd also included $200 in cash that he stated that Cathy had wanted them to have because of the damage that she'd done to her father's car. At a later point, he told investigators that he believed this was a huge, stupid mistake on his behalf, and if he'd gone back he wouldn't have done this, he wouldn't have sent a letter, and he likely would have told someone about the discovery because, if anything, it made him look like he had more involvement. It was at first an element within the investigation that he completely denied having any involvement in terms of him writing the letter, but once the help of handwriting experts were enlisted, it was determined that Paul Farrell had in fact written that anonymous letter. And following this, he had elaborated his main reason as to why he'd chosen to write the letter. He had at the time only panicked for his own sake, as he didn't want people to keep on searching for Cathy if they think that she's actually a missing person and happened to stumble across this car parked on his sort of area around his trailer and get the wrong idea, i.e. assumed that he had been responsible for Cathy's disappearance, whereby he had initially planned on writing this letter since it kind of gives the impression that they should stop looking for her because she ran away of her own accord and she didn't want anyone to find her. And then in March, almost a month after Cathy's disappearance, there had been no leads in the search into Cathy's disappearance, and so Cathy's boyfriend, Darvin, decided that him and his brother should take it upon themselves and go and follow up on these claims that some people in the area had seen this smoke coming out around the night of her disappearance on Bismarck Road. So they decided to go and check it out themselves and see if this led to anywhere. And here, obviously, they came across Cathy's burned car, and for a brief period of time it seemed as though the investigation had somewhere to start up again. The area was marked off and the help of the FBI was enlisted to search the car for any sort of evidence, anything they could find in relation to Cathy maybe having been inside at some point. They found no fingerprints inside the car due to the extent of the fire damage, and they also found no sign of Cathy having been inside it in terms of she hadn't died there were no remains, anything like that. It was noticed though that the area of land in which the car was placed on hadn't been damaged at all by any fire. It showed no evidence of having been in contact with fire, which is very unusual considering the car was extremely burned, so it would have had to have been burning for a number of hours. And so it became an extremely likely possibility that the car had been set on fire and burned elsewhere and then placed in this area round by Paul Farrell's trailer. Whether this was or was not the case, whether this was done intentionally or not, thanks to the location in which the car was found, Paul Farrell became an immediate suspect in the case. On March the 19th in the year of 1988, a team of FBI investigators gained permission to enter and search Paul Farrell's home on account of him being a particularly likely suspect in the case of Cathy's disappearance. Inside the master bedroom, they decided to tear up the carpet on the floor just in search of any piece of evidence that may be hidden or were underneath the carpet. And this is where they found small traces of blood as well as up the walls and on the ceiling. And so the main sort of reasoning behind this being important was that small traces of blood on floor and walls can sometimes be explained by typical things, but blood on the ceiling is much less unlikely to just happen. Although I would say that the media at the time really seems to exaggerate this finding. They made it appear to the public as though the amount of blood that they found was like lethal amounts. They'd found loads of blood or like pools of blood in the house, when in reality it was very small traces of blood. And so the traces of blood were sent to be tested in a lab, and they concluded that the blood had belonged to a woman, but they couldn't conclusively say whether it was or was not a match to Cathy's DNA. So they used some DNA from her parents, and it couldn't conclusively say whether it was connected or whether it wasn't. It was just inconclusive. It had been surmised though that wherever the blood had originated from, the spots of it found inside the bedroom appeared as though they had been cleaned up and hidden intentionally. The most likely scenario considered by investigators was that Cathy had been at some point inside Farrell's home. She'd been killed during some sort of act of violence, which would then explain the traces of blood, and he'd then covered it up to ensure that no one came across it. Investigators had asked him if he was able to provide any form of explanation as to how these blood traces got inside his bedroom, but all he could say was that the blood must have been there before he moved in, that it wasn't anything that he'd done, and he claimed his complete innocence. With all the growing public suspicion and the believed evidence collected from the search of his home, Paul Farrell was arrested on charges of kidnapping, arson and murder in relation to Cathy Ford's case. What needed to be taken into consideration in relation to the search for evidence in this case was that the case actually took place over two separate areas, two separate states, since Cathy lived in one area and then her car was found somewhere completely different. They took it upon themselves to look into Paul Farrell's background, and to my knowledge they didn't find anything too concerning that indicated he had a past of violence or attacking women. But one thing that was mentioned in numerous sources that would come up again later on in the case was that he'd allegedly had a past of making prank phone calls, and it was really stressed on a number of sources that these prank phone calls were sexual in nature. And by this it means that he had a tendency to ring up local women who worked somewhere like a shop or something, and he would ask them to go to a certain book and read out passages from this book to him that were explicit. On the 25th of January of the year of 1989, Paul Farrell's trial began, and initially the prosecution team had attempted to introduce the argument that he was not mentally sound and that he had a split personality, or more likely a dissociative disorder of some kind, and this is why he isn't able to provide any sort of explanation as to any of the evidence, but he is in fact guilty. A woman named Tamila Kitzmiller was called in as a witness, claiming that her and a number of other local women who worked in a number of bookshops in the area had received numerous phone calls from an unidentified man, so an unknown strange man, asking them to meet him in different areas. In the trial, she stated that she believed the man who had rung her had in fact been Farrell, but then further down the line in the investigation after the trial, she openly stated how she was never actually 100% sure that it was him. But according to her, before the trial had started, she'd been told by the prosecuting team that they were able to provide enough evidence in court that already found him guilty, that they knew for certain that he was the one placing these phone calls, and so she claimed that this had almost persuaded her in a way to believe that it definitely was him, since according to the prosecution team they had already known it was him. According to her as well, these same people had also told her that they had learned, so they had knowledge and factual evidence that Paul Farrell had previously worked in a place called Yellowstone Park, and they were able to connect him to a series of recent murders that had occurred there. And as it would later turn out, this allegedly would not be the only witness called upon in the trial that had made statements following a set of persuasive coaching at the hands of the prosecution, with many people allegedly being persuaded to give slightly altered or even sometimes completely falsified statements regarding Farrell's guilt. Officials did go on record to almost combat these claims that people stated after the trial, saying that they'd been persuaded or they'd been encouraged to give false evidence. They claimed that there was no persuasion involved whatsoever, or encouragement in any sense really, to give any form of false statements in any of the stages within the trial. An interesting development came about in the trial when the prosecuting team introduced an expert in body language to testify in regards to an interview that they'd had with Paul Farrell prior to the trial. This expert in body language claimed that when he'd read aloud a hypothetical scenario relating to Cathy being murdered, they had tried to get Paul to kind of come up, like offer up any sort of ways in which she could have died, any possible scenarios that she could have been murdered in. And according to this expert, they witnessed a number of signs of guilt on Farrell's behalf in his body language throughout the interview. However, the rigidity and reliability of this claim can be questioned to an extreme manner, as I'm sure you all can kind of gather, mostly since there was no physical evidence of this interview ever occurring. So they hadn't recorded the interview, and it was essentially just this one individual's word to go on against Farrell's. And obviously it is extremely possible for someone's opinion or their memory in a lot of senses to be persuaded. And on a side note, this is actually a topic in which I will be discussing in a few weeks' time on my Psychology Saturday series. So if you're interested in this sort of process of persuasion, like not knowing that someone's persuaded you, maybe persuaded your memory in some way, especially during like criminal trials, then I will have a video up on it discussing it kind of briefly in a couple weeks' time. A woman named Kim Nelson was also introduced as a witness in the trial, as she lived in a trailer neighbouring Farrell's. She'd informed the investigators that she was able to see smoke from his property on the night of Cathy's disappearance from her own trailer, as well as hearing some loud screams coming from the area of the trailer on a number of different occasions, not just on this night. Her statement allegedly claimed that on the night of February the 17th, so the night of Cathy's disappearance, she had heard loud bangs, a single gunshot, and a high-pitched scream that she believed was a woman's. But what she publicly shared following the trial itself painted a different picture entirely relating to this statement. So she claimed that the prosecution had put words into her mouth, as she put it, and that what she'd intended on elaborating on was that all of the things that she'd heard, she'd stated in her statement in terms of what she'd heard that night, were not really uncommon in the area that she lived in, and even sometimes you were able to hear things like that coming from other trailers as TVs that were turned up too loud. So she had intended on elaborating that this was actually normal, and it wasn't necessarily that concerning or even condemning really, but she never got the chance to because the prosecution were putting words into her mouth. She also later publicly stated that the claim that on her original statement stated that she had specifically recalled hearing those noises on the night of Cathy's disappearance, so on the night of February 17th, but she had not said this with any sort of certainty, as she just remembered hearing these sort of noises, these type of noises around that time. So she couldn't remember specifically on February the 17th hearing those exact noises as it was initially painted or suggested in the trial. This does indicate a likely possibility, if they're true, that her statements amongst others were coerced in some senses into supporting what the prosecution were trying to argue. Although some investigators have then after this argued that they believe that witnesses who have cried persuasion following the trial have actually done so as a result of Cathy's friends or family or someone close to Cathy's case having some form of encouragement on them, having some form of influence and asking them to say that the prosecution were persuading them. But obviously neither of these statements can be confirmed or denied, and the entire thing is literally just one side's word against the other. Despite Farrell's defence team attempting to argue his case that he'd been working at his parents' shop all through the day of Cathy's disappearance prior to him heading to the bowling alley, as he said, Paul Farrell was ultimately convicted of kidnapping, murder and arson. He received a 15 years minimum prison sentence, but there were many people who are very, very doubtful and sceptical of his guilt, and they argued that the prosecution appeared to make a lot from the fact that they had minimal evidence and they hadn't even had a body, so they were able to make a very strong argument and a very influential argument considering none of this had ever been recovered. In the months after the trial, there was a lot of public speculation arguing for and arguing against Paul Farrell's guilt, relating to both her disappearance and her alleged death. A local journalist decided to take it upon himself to go and do some digging into the case, and he allegedly found 2 witnesses who had actually seen Cathy alive and well the year after her disappearance. This couple were Gorman locals, and they had been making their way through Tennessee when they stopped off at a small restaurant where inside a waitress working there looked a lot like Cathy. According to them, they had obviously been aware of Cathy's case because they were from the area, and they spent a lot of their time initially looking at this waitress, trying to work out if it was just an uncanny similarity or whether it was actually Cathy Ford. And they said that the waitress had noticed them looking at her for a significant period of time. And when she'd kind of clocked them, she became very visibly nervous, and she briefly spoke to another waitress, said something to her, then this other waitress came over to them, asked them for their order, had a little bit of small talk in which she happened to ask the couple where they were from. So they obviously replied that they were from Gorman, and then after taking their order, she headed back to the woman who looked like Cathy, said something very briefly to her. The woman who looked like Cathy just seemed to rush off into the back very, very quickly, and she didn't come out for the rest of the time that the couple were inside the restaurant. So this would, if it's all true, obviously suggest that Cathy had in fact decided to run away of her own accord and start her new life elsewhere, and that she was alive and well, while allowing her family and friends to think that she was missing or worse. Although many people close to the case choose not to believe that this claim is very, very credible, possibly since they were from Gorman and they could have been mistaken, or they could have been wanting to get close to the case more specifically, I don't know. But with eyewitness statements, there's always arguments for and against their credibility, and unfortunately you can only kind of take them by their word. Paul Farrell made an attempt to appeal his conviction with the argument that the prosecution had made their case despite that there wasn't any solid evidence suggesting Cathy was no longer alive, that the alleged evidence collected from his home was exaggerated extensively, and that the testimony given by the body language expert was unorthodox and should not have been used in the trial. His appeal, however, was rejected, although at this point many of the witnesses called upon during the trial to aid the prosecution's case had actually since recanted their statements. and initially it was stated that the case could no longer be appealed, that it would not be revisited, and that the sentencing was final. However, in 2001, a review of the case was carried out and Paul Ferrell was released on parole just a few years after that. Since his release, he has publicly declared his innocence numerous times, and many people agreed that what happened to him was a severe miscarriage of justice, that it was all falsified and exaggerated, and that in reality he was scapegoated because they wanted answers, while on the flip side of that, others are completely convinced that he is guilty. It has been proposed the possibility of someone perhaps close to Cathy could have possibly been to blame for her disappearance or her death, whatever had happened to her, and had planted the car on Paul Ferrell's property, maybe perhaps because they had prior knowledge of their relationship. This is all speculation though, and Cathy Ford has never been found, with there being no indication whatsoever of whether someone had taken her life or if she is somewhere alive and well. The main question that I have in regards to this case is relating to the lost hours in which Cathy had left her parents' diner and then before she had called Paul Ferrell. So it just seems to me that this needs to be focused on more. There's just a lot of unanswered questions as to what she was doing in this period of time before she'd rung up Paul. He said that she was extremely upset and that she'd wanted to meet him. So what I'm wondering is what happened in those lost hours. So yeah, let me know your thoughts down below. This one is a very frustrating case to me. I don't want to go too much into my opinion because I think it can really divide people's opinions, this case. Like I said, some people are adamant that Paul Ferrell had nothing to do with it, that he was scapegoated, while others are convinced that he is extremely guilty and covered it up well. So I'm not going to go into what I think happened because I just find the whole thing frustrating, but I do agree that it does seem like there was a lot of issues in terms of the investigation and how it was carried out. So let me know your theories down below, what you think maybe happened, what you think is the most likely scenario. I'd love to see some discussion down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you guys very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.